a map I think we looked at before. Uh, this is a map we looked at before. I got a little note that says recording in progress. Maybe John just started the recording there. um, but this is a map kind of showing where Rome was in the first century here. And it's showing the extent of Roman power and how they annexed certain areas. So the purple areas here are the older areas, and then they annexed Gaul, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a famous general, as you know, and at the same time there was Pompey. Caesar, Pompey were two of the members of the first triumvirate that ruled Rome when the Republic fell apart, and then Caesar became dictator, the sole ruler. And so they began to extend their power into what we think of as Turkey today, and then down here into Palestine, Israel, and Egypt, and so forth. So they're controlling all of this territory now. So we're going back now to 63 BC. We're looking at the Roman period here. 63 BC, so that will end us because we're going to stop. Because we're in the New Testament age, we'll take it to we'll take our history up till into the 2nd century, just for completeness sake here. If you remember back when we were looking at the Hasmonean dynasty, remember the Jews had revolted against the Syrians, against the Seleucids, and had set up their own kingdom again, the Maccabean revolt, and then the Hasmonean dynasty. And we had a series of rulers there, and one of the ones in the 1st century BC was a man named Alexander Unias. Alexander Unias, who ruled from 103 to 76 BC. It's interesting today. I was just reading a story that in Israel they're always finding things, and some young boy out somewhere in Israel found a coin minted under Alexander Unias's reign. It's got his picture on it, and it's not the first time they found one, but they just somebody found another one. A young boy found one. Sometimes people just pick up things in Israel and find some extraordinary things over the years. But remember, Alexander Unias died, he appointed his wife, Alexandra, as the ruler, and she ruled. She had 2 sons, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. And she appointed Hyrcanus II as the high priest and Aristobulus as the military commander. And they battled back and forth for power. Aristobulus ultimately drove his brother out of power, and he took over in 66 BC. He took complete power of Israel, of Judea, but then in 63 BC, the Romans came in. Pompey comes in, the Roman general Pompey comes in, and that's where we're at now here. We're in the Roman period, 63 BC, and we're back to Hyrcanus. So when Pompey comes in, he gets rid of Aristobulus and his support goes to back to Hyrcanus, who had been made a high priest by his mother. I say here under Hyrcanus II, 63 to 40 BC, that because of his support of the Roman general Pompey, Hyrcanus was again made high priest, but not king. Political authority rested with the Romans, whose interests were represented by Antipater. Now, you remember Antipater was this Idumean. When Alexander Unias, one of the things Alexander Unias did was when he conquered territory, he conquered the territory south of Judea called Idumea. And he compelled the Idumeans to be circumcised and accept the Jewish religion. So in theory, these Idumeans became Jews. And the Romans, Alexander Unias, he had put this man Antipater. Unias was in control of everything, but he put this man Antipater, this Idumean, in charge of that part of his kingdom. And when the Romans came in, they kept Antipater in power. And as I say, Roman interests were represented by Antipater. So even though they made Hyrcanus, the high priest, Antipater was really the real power. He represented Rome. He really had the major power. I say he primarily promoted the interest of his own house, which was the beginning of the Herodian dynasty. Antipater and his Arabian wife, Cypros, had 4 sons: Phaziel, Herod, Joseph, and a daughter, Salome. But Herod is the one that we know as Herod the Great. So he has these 4 sons, and but Antipater is useful to the government. The Romans like him because the Romans are still afraid of the Hasmonean supporters. Remember, the Jews have had a kingdom there for 100 years, and they're loyal to the Hasmonean dynasty. Hyrcanus is the last of those, and Aristobulus, but they got rid of him. But so they're always afraid that because the Jews look upon the Hasmoneans as the rightful rulers, not the Romans. So the Romans, they turn to Antipater because he's really an outsider, and they figure he's going to be more loyal to Rome and so forth. So they chose him because they wanted him to keep the Hasmonean rebels, the people who supported that dynasty, in check and so forth. These Hasmoneans never really resigned themselves to Roman rule. I mean, they were always agitating, creating problems. So that's Pompey comes in and sets this situation up. I notice here next, when Julius Caesar defeated Pompey in 48 BC. So we had this first triumvirate with, Pompey and Caesar being the main 2 generals. Well, then Caesar defeats Pompey in Egypt in 48 BC. Hyrcanus and Antipater joined him. So they chose the right side here, Caesar's side. Julius Caesar made Antipater a tax-exempt Roman citizen, which means his son enjoyed citizenship. So that's what I said in the first class. I said, if you suddenly open the New Testament, you find that now you have a Roman citizen who is king over Judea. That's Herod the Great. So Herod becomes the king, as we'll see, and he is a Roman citizen because his father is made a Roman citizen. That's what most people suspect of the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was from the province of Cilicia, and not everybody in Cilicia was a Roman citizen. And people became Roman citizens by different means. Sometimes they would, because of some act, some support of a Roman general, various means. There were all kinds of ways to become a Roman citizen, but many people just suspect, and there's no way to know, that because Paul says, I was born a Roman citizen, which means his father, is a Roman citizen. And so maybe his father did some act or supported some general or something, and somehow that he got, this is what happened to Antipater. He became a citizen, and his sons, therefore, were citizens. So Antipater is made a tax-exempt Roman citizen. He's appointed procurator of Judea. Procurator is just a title for governor. The Romans had different titles: prefect, procurator. It's just a title, one of the titles for governor of Judea, and reconfirmed Hyrcanus's high priesthood with the title ethnarch of the Jews. Ethnarch just means a ruler of a people. So it's kind of an honorary title. It's just, he's appeasing these men. Antipater is the real power. He's the governor. But Hyrcanus is the priesthood, the high priest, and he's given this additional title. He's sort of supposedly controlling the Jews, or he's the ruler of the Jews. But the real governor, real ruler, as I say, was Antipater, who appointed his son Phaziel governor of Jerusalem, and his second son Herod, at age 25, the governor of Galilee in 47 BC. So Herod is appointing, Antipater is appointing his sons to these various positions. Herod is governor of Galilee. He performs very well as a governor and so forth. So, gives taxes people and gets funds for the Romans. Herod became betrothed to Mariambe, the granddaughter of Hyrcanus II. So if we look at the line here of Herod for a moment, the family tree of Herod, here's Herod, and here's his wives. So some of his wives that are on the chart here. Now, he already had a wife named Doris, and that's a problem. So now he banishes his wife Doris and her son. He just gets rid of them, removes them, banishes them, and marries Mariambe. As I say, Mariambe is the granddaughter of Hyrcanus II. So Herod is doing this to kind of marry into the Hasmonean line. He wants to get support of the Jews by being, now he's married the daughter of Hyrcanus, one of the Hasmonean, in the Hasmonean line. So this strengthened his political base. He's marrying into the royal household of the Hasmoneans and so forth. And so the idea would be, now Hyrcanus is the ethnarch of the Jews. He's kind of ruling the Jews. So if Hyrcanus dies, when he does pass away, then Herod is just the natural person to step in there. So he's greasing the skids, so to speak, here, to move into power. Now that brings us to Antigonus. Antigonus, 40 BC to 37 BC, he was the son of Aristobulus II. Pompey had killed Aristobulus. Remember, it was Hyrcanus and Aristobulus were vying for power. Pompey favors Hyrcanus, gets rid of Aristobulus, but then there is Antigonus. Often these people who were royalties, sometimes the Romans respected that, so they didn't necessarily kill off the children. Sometimes here he was carried off to Rome by Pompey. So Pompey gets rid of his father, but he takes Aristobulus' son. Well, naturally, he wants to avenge his father and so forth. So Antigonus eventually escapes from Rome, and he works to overthrow his uncle Hyrcanus, Hyrcanus II. His uncle is his father's brother, who is still ethnarch of the Jews and so forth like that. As I say here, when the Parthians, a powerful nation at this time, vied with the Romans for control of the East, invaded Syria, Antigonus got their help in deposing Hyrcanus. Herod had to flee. So I think we mentioned the Parthians once before. The Parthians, remember, we had all these empires, the Assyrian Empire in this area, we had the Babylonian Empire in this area, then the Persian Empire. Well, those empires crumbled and a new power has arisen from about 250 BC till about 224, 225 BC, AD, I'm sorry. So from, 500 years. So 224 BC, 240, about 247. So remember, the Romans are expanding their power. They're becoming powerful, but here's the Parthians. And the Parthians are the natural enemies of the Romans. And the Parthians are trying to expand their empire, and they're trying to expand here into Palestine over here. And so Antigonus, he's looking for allies. So he gets the Parthians to help him. And they come in and depose Hyrcanus, and Herod has to flee. I mean, Herod, he can't stay as governor of Galilee and so forth. And so Antigonus seems to be, sort of in power here all of a sudden. And he is. But notice the dates here, 40 to 37 BC. That brings us back to Herod the Great. So Herod flees. Actually, he leaves his wife and his children, Mary Amby, in a place called Herodium. I'll talk about that in a moment. And he flees to Rome. There's a lot of politics here. But anyway, the Roman Senate declares him the king of Judea in 40 BC. 40 BC. Well, yeah, but he's he's not in control of his territory here, because the Parthians have come in. Antigonus is in control here, so the Hasmoneans are back in power again here. Antigonus is. So he has to flee. Herod has to flee, and he goes there, and the Senate makes him king on the recommendation of Mark Antony. So remember that after the death of Caesar, we still don't have the Republic back in Rome. We have what we talked about last time, that second triumvirate. And that's made up of Octavian, who eventually becomes Augustus Caesar, and Mark Antony, and a man named Lepidus. So it's Mark Antony mainly, and Octavian. So at this time, Mark Antony is sort of in control of the eastern part of the empire. And he gets the Senate to make Herod, make him king of Judea. So Herod, in sometime late 40, maybe early 39 BC, he returns to Palestine, aided by Antony's legate, Sosius. He captures Galilee, and finally Jerusalem fell in 37. So what happens is he gets Roman legions to come in. This is a map showing in the time of Christ, in the first, this is where the Roman legions were at. These legions, these armies, were always supposed to stay outside of Italy. Remember, Caesar violated that when he crossed the Rubicon up here in northern Italy and came into Rome. But here's the legions. They were stationed on the borders out here, to keep the peace and so forth. So there's legions over here in Syria, 4 of them. These ultimately become important, even the 10th Legion in later on with the destruction of Jerusalem under Vespasian and Titus. So he gets help from Roman legions, and very powerful. They come in and they recapture Galilee and finally Jerusalem in the summer of 37. So Herod gets control. He's given control of, this is Herod's kingdom. It's about the size of David and Solomon's kingdom, in that sense, similar in size and scope. So Galilee, Samaria, Idumea, Judea, Idumea, and Perea over here. And this other part it's all of this other territory is really under the province of Syria. Roman has a province there. And this is a map of the Roman Empire in the age of Augustus. So this is the time we're talking about right now, Herod the Great. Anthony will ultimately be defeated, as we'll see here. But I'm just showing here how Rome was set up. It was set up mainly with provinces run by governors or military commanders. And there were mainly 2 types of provinces, what are called senatorial provinces and imperial. The senatorial are in the purple here. And these are the more stable, less turmoil of factions, revolts. And so you don't need the kind of troops that you're going to need in these other provinces. For instance, the Apostle Paul comes here to Corinth, and he is in the province of Achaia. On the map there, it says Achaia there. He's in the province of Achaia, and he meets the Roman governor Gallio, and he's a governor of a senatorial province. So Paul was in a lot of senatorial provinces here. These other provinces in this pinkish, whatever color this is, reddish, pinkish, these are imperial provinces. And these were provinces that were more unstable. And so you generally had a military man in charge, a representative of the emperor, who you would have more troops there. And that's what we have here with Syria up here, Antioch, Syria, and so forth. And this Damascus, this area here. Now you notice the green here, it says these are principal client states. So sometimes Rome, when they conquered an area, they left a king, a local king in charge. They left a ruler. And that's what happened with, doesn't show it exactly, that's what happened with Herod. Herod is not in a Roman province technically. He is the king of Judea. It's a sort of a province, but it's really a client kingdom. And there were a number of client kingdoms around where the Romans ruled. They were ultimately in control, but they ruled through this ruler. I mentioned here next about Herod that the years of Herod's rule brought turmoil for the Jewish people. He was nobility, but of Idumean descent. Remember, his ancestors had been forced to convert to Judaism under John Hyrcanus, but Jewish people never accepted him as their ruler. They'll say here, he was viewed as a representative of a foreign power. Herod executed 45 of the wealthiest and most prominent Jewish aristocrats and appropriated their property. So, the Jews never really accepted him. We get that impression of the New Testament, obviously. even though he was married to Mary Amby, the second of his 10 wives. We don't have all those wives. They had 10 wives. We don't have them all listed on that chart we looked at. She was the granddaughter of, remember, Aristobulus. Uh, that really didn't give him legitimacy in the sight of his people. He was hoping it would. He was trying to gain legitimacy. I mentioned next that Herod had many problems that grew out of his jealousy and paranoia. He had Aristobulus III, his brother-in-law, executed. Later, Mariamne, her mother, and his two sons by Amri were killed because Herod viewed their Hasmonean lineage as a threat. So remember, we looked at this chart here. So remember, he got rid of Doris, and he killed Mariamne. Now he had two wives named Mariamne, two Mariambes. I guess he liked that name, whatever. But so he had Mariamne, her mother, and his two sons by Mamre were killed. He had his eldest son Antipater put to death. So here's Antipater here. This was the son of Doris. Doris was banished, but then he has Antipater put to death. Herod was always afraid that, one of his children were going to overthrow him. He was always imagining plots. And so he was constantly changing his will. Six times. He's had 6 different wills because he imagined these plots. Some were real, some were imagined. I say shortly after Herod's death, there occurred the well-known incident of the Magi, the divine instruction that took Joseph, Mary, and Jesus to Egypt, and Herod's massacre of all the male children of Bethlehem who were 2 years and under. So again, that massacre was caused by the fact the Magi came and said, the King of the Jews. They came to him and said, where do we find the King of the Jews? And Herod wasn't too happy about that. I just mentioned this chart here to kind of remind you how to get these things straight in our minds between Matthew and Luke. We in both Gospels, we have a birth account of Jesus, and you can see the various incidents here. We're trying to put these in chronological order. Gabriel promises the birth of John to Zechariah. Then he did Jesus to Mary and so forth. Mary, Elizabeth. This is all in Luke. Elizabeth gives birth to John the Baptist. Then in Matthew, an angel appears to Mary, judged by Mary's pregnancy, remember? And because he was going to put her away. And then Luke talks about the birth in Bethlehem, and then the shepherds, in the common Christmas scenes of in the displays. You have Jesus, there in the manger, and the shepherds are there, and the wise men are there. Well, it's pretty clear that they were there at different times, and so in Luke gives the account of the shepherds who visit, him there in Bethlehem. But then the Magi arrive, and Jesus is older by then. So he's not, in the manger anymore. He's older. And that's when, and so this is what is upsetting Herod. And that's where we get the 2 years and under, probably. Remember, Herod says, execute all these babies 2 years and younger. So he doesn't know exactly when Jesus is born, but he's getting signals from the Magi. And so Jesus has been born, a year or so, probably, when the Magi come. And so Herod is probably, for good measure, saying, kill all these children 2 and younger. And that's where Matthew comes in and gives us the account of this. Joseph escapes to Egypt, and then he returns with his family to Nazareth after Herod's death. Remember, after Herod dies. I'm going to come back to that point in just a moment here. Now, let's see. What time are we supposed to break? 6:40, is that right? I think is that right? 6:40?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yes, okay. So let's talk here a little bit about Herod. I say here, Herod had an impressive building program, which he used to introduce Western architectural elements across his kingdom, the Roman elements, and so forth. He constructed fortresses, palaces, aqueducts, stadiums, amphitheaters, and even entire urban areas. So there's a lot of these things he constructed that we read about in the New Testament, like the Antonia Fortress, where Jesus was taken, when he was, before he was crucified, where he was beaten, tortured, and so forth. Masada, where a place for refuge for Herod, and then we'll talk about it later, where the last rebels of the revolt fled after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Herodium, where Herod had another outpost where he could keep his family safe and him safe. So apparently where he was buried. Caesarea, a lot about Caesarea in the book of Acts. Herod, they built that and so forth. So I had a number of building projects here. I say his most impressive construction was the renovation of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem in 20 BC, which was not finished until about AD 63. So let's look at some of those, just look at some of those building projects, which are quite impressive. The first of these we want to look at, we'll look at Masada first. So here's a map of the area. Here's Jerusalem up here, Bethlehem down here, Jericho, you can see. Here's Qumran. We'll talk about Qumran a little later because that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right here on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. And then Masada down here, another desert place here. So here is Masada. Remember, it's down here on the western shore of the Dead Sea, lower part of the Dead Sea. And so the southern end, so we're looking toward the south here, southeast here. And here is Masada. You can see that down here, and the Dead Sea is down here. Here's another view of Masada. You can see how isolated it is right here. Very isolated. And, obviously a place where you could be very safe. It would it would take a lot to be able to dislodge anyone from Masada. Now the Romans did it. We'll study it. We'll talk about that later. It took a lot of effort. They spent a lot of time and effort to dislodge the last Jewish rebels there. Less than 100. So that was they don't tolerate any rebellion against the empire. There's another view from the east of Masada. You can see how desolate it is. This here is called the Snake Path. I don't know if can you see that, this path going up here. You can walk up this path, and people do walk up here to get to Masada, get up here. And so if you ever go there, you will see people walking up there. When I went up there, we went up the backside, walked up the backside. There's also an overhead tram they'll take you there, but our guide wouldn't let us take that. We had to walk, so that was tough. Has anybody been to Masada? Anybody in the class been there? Oh, you have. Oh, good. Did you walk up or take that overhead aerial car? What was that? What'd you say, Larry?
We took the tram up and down.
Yeah. Everybody take the tram?
No,
Nobody walked it?
They walked.
Oh, did they? Did you walk the Snake Road up there? Oh man, that was fun. I hope it wasn't in the summertime. We were there in July, and it was bad. It was hot. All right, let's stop here and take our break. We'll come back and talk about Masada a little bit.
All right, get to work.
All right, here's Masada again. And let me mention a few things about Masada. So according to what statistics I have, it's supposed to be about 190 foot above sea level, but 1,500 feet above the level of the Dead Sea. So it's pretty high there. If we're talking about the Dead Sea down there, 1,500 foot. It's the mountain itself there is 1,950 foot long and 650 foot wide at the widest point there. About 4,250 feet in circumference, about 23 acres. We talked about that snake path, as you can see in the front there, the snake's up there. That's 900 feet in elevation. So you're climbing 900 feet. There's a ramp on the other side, a siege ramp. This is the ramp that the Romans built, we believe, to be able to get in on top of Masada as they were trying to capture, destroy, defeat these Jewish rebels who had taken refuge there. And it's about 900 feet in elevation there. From what we know, Herod fortified Masada between 36 and 30 BC and made it quite a fortress. We're not told exactly why he did it, but we can guess pretty much that it was a pretty good place to escape in case of an uprising. You remember that he had to flee one time when Antigonus came back and got the Parthians. There was always the danger that, in that part of the world, that someone would come in and challenge his rule, even though the Romans were theoretically behind him. He's on the fringes of the Roman Empire. So he was always worried about a Hasmonean threat to his throne. That's why he was executing his sons and his wives and so forth. He was kind of worried about Egypt too. There was Cleopatra in Egypt. He was concerned about her and her rule there. It was located close to this peninsula here. Let me go back here. We look at this map. You can see right here, it's very close to this part that sticks out here, this Lycian Peninsula. And so one of the ways you would get into Israel here is to cross here, right at this area here. And so this is kind of a way to keep an eye on that. Now, one of the ways we know a lot about these things is a Jewish historian by the name of Josephus. We'll talk about Josephus later on, but Josephus was he was a Jewish general. He fought against the Romans when they came in to put down the revolt in 66 BC, but then he went over to the Roman side ultimately after they defeated him. He ended up going to Rome and writing a history. Wrote some books, a history of the Jews and history of these times. And he says that Herod brought his when the Parthians invaded, he went to Rome. Josephus says, he goes to Rome and he leaves his family there and heads to Rome. He's appointed king and so forth. But he goes to Rome to get an army, Roman legions to come, and in which they do. But his family almost died, according to Josephus. They were saved by a sudden downpour of water there in the area, which filled up the cisterns. So I'll talk about that. So how do you get water in a place like that? Well, you collect it during the winter months in cisterns, mainly. Herod, the main construction happened, about 22 BC to 15 BC during Herod's reign. He did some stuff before then. This is, just a natural hill there. So it's really a place that's very easy to defend, obviously, and was used by Herod on different occasions. So there's a view of from the east with the snake ascent here. And then we said this is the siege ramp that the Romans built here in order to get into Masada. And here's what the top looks like. They've done a lot of excavations here. When I was there in 2000, most of this stuff wasn't done. They have done a lot of excavations here of what this was. Herod had two palaces here, and quite an extensive place here. He's got a northern palace here and a southern palace, his western palace, I should say, two palaces. This kind of shows you some of the things they found there: synagogue, storehouse, pools, and so forth. So he had all the refinements that a Roman would have necessary for living comfortably in this place. Here's a cistern. You can see the people down here to hold water that was collected. A lot of water. Here's a bathhouse he built. As a Roman, Romans just had to have bathhouses, and this is some of what they've uncovered from the wall. What's left of the mosaics and stuff on the wall. So these bathhouses, these Roman bathhouses, they had different parts. They had a warming place. They had a cold room, warming room. Here's they call the cold room, the colder water, the frigidarium. So you would go in, you would heat up and cool down. There's the frigidarium. Here's the caldarium, which is the warming place. This kind of reconstruction, but there's many examples of this in the ancient world, and these are, so you had a pavement on top of these pillars here, and then you build a fire underneath here from this entrance here, and this would heat up, and you have these pipes here, and you get steam, so it would be like a steam bath, and so it was just a steam bath in a sense, this caldarium. So you'd go in there, steam bath, and go to the cold room and so forth. So here is Masada here, we just talked about. Another place Herod had was the Herodian. Now that's very close to Jerusalem. So this is another fortified place where Herod could go and escape if he needed to. If he was being attacked, forces were coming in and so forth. And that's not far from Jerusalem here, as you can see. Now the Herodian is it was a natural hill, as I understand it, and then Herod built it up and made it what it is today, what it looks like today. And so this is a smaller place, but he still had the refinements of a Roman, bathhouse there and so forth, towers. So it's a fortress where Herod went sometimes when things were getting tough. There's a look at it, you can see. When I was there, they were doing excavations. Since I was there in 2000, at least the reports you read are that they're pretty sure they have found this was where Herod was buried. There was always question about where was Herod buried at, or where's his tomb at? And when I read, they fairly sure they found it here at the Herodian. Here's a view from a north panorama, so forth. So that's one of his building projects. So many building projects. Let's talk now about the Temple Mount, because that is certainly a major project, and remains of it are still there today. So here's a model of Jerusalem, a model. This model, when I was in Jerusalem, when I was there in 2000, this model was at a place called the Holy Land Hotel. It has since been moved to the Israeli Museum. And this is constructed trying to show what Jerusalem was like in the time of Jesus, or really about 100 AD. So you can see the walls that go around Jerusalem. And here's the Temple Mount here, Fortress Antonia. And we'll talk, there's the pools of Bethesda, mentioned in the New Testament. Now here's what that Temple Mount looks like today. So here we're looking, this is the western, the eastern wall here. This is the east, and this is the south, the north here, and over here is the west. So so here's the eastern wall here, and here's the southern wall down here. And so now you see the Dome of the Rock is on that Temple Mount now. And this is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. It's just meant to commemorate where Muhammad took his night flight, supposedly, to Jerusalem and so forth. And this is the Al-Aqsa. This is actually a mosque. These sites are in the news all the time. This is the southern entrance to the temple here. And so over here would be the Kidron Valley, and down here in the south would be the Gehenna Valley. This is the city of modern Jerusalem over here. So we're in the old, this is all part of the old city, we would say. Here's a view looking westward. We're on the east side here. There's that mosque I talked about and the Dome of the Rock here. This was where the temple was originally located. There's really not any doubt about that, as far as I'm concerned. I think it's really clear. This is where the temple originally stood, where all the temples originally stood, right here on this temple, on that Temple Mount. So here's that model again versus what we're seeing in the city. And so we're looking on the western side. I'm sorry, the western side. So now we're looking, this is back when the model was in the Holy Land Hotel. You can walk around here, so it's been moved, but here's the Temple Mount, and here's the western wall here of the temple. Here's the Fortress Antonia over here. This kind of shows you the growth of the temple over time. So here's the Temple Mount as built by King Hezekiah. Basically, the idea generally was to come into the south side here, but you can come in over here. Then there's a fortress that was added here by Antiochus IV during, then there is the Hasmonean extension to the Temple Mount here. And then here is Herod's Temple Mount. So Herod, basically, the first thing he did was double the size of the Temple Mount. He increased the size, actually out here to the west, east, but mainly the north and the south here. Increased the size of the Temple Mount, beautified the temple, so forth. As I was saying, he started this in 20 BC, not finished till 63. Remember, Jesus says there in John 2, says, this temple is being built for so many years and it's still not built. It was finished in about 63, they say, and, demolished in AD 70. And here's the Western Wall. I'll be talking about that. So you go there today, if you go to Jerusalem, you'll visit the Western Wall. And you can see the south here. You can come up, you can walk on these steps here in the south. So here's a model looking from the south. This is the south end here. And this is the original city of David. This would be Mount Zion here. So when the Old Testament talks about Mount Zion, we're talking about this area here. This is the original city of David, the original Jerusalem here. And then the Temple Mount was here. And this was added, of course, by Solomon, not as big. The mount wasn't as big as this is Herod's larger mount, but it wasn't as big. And then we have the western part of the city over here. So here is the various parts of the Temple Mount, that Antonia Fortress we talked about. This is Solomon's porch, which would have been there, Herod created. And the New Testament mentions that Jesus taught in Solomon's colonnade. so forth in this area. Here's the Royal Stoa, which was hard to say exactly when that was built. Maybe at the time of Jesus, around that time. This is where the Sanhedrin would have met here on the south end of the temple. Here's the temple western wall, Robinson's Arch, which still parts of that stick out there, western wall here. See here. And I'm pointing an arrow to the western wall here, right here. This is, I guess, considered the most holiest site in a way in Judaism. Actually, the Temple Mount is, but they don't really have access to the Temple Mount. There's that same western wall. So you're looking at this western wall here, and then you're looking at the western wall right here. This is the Feast of Tabernacles. So Jews come in here, various celebrations and so forth. But they're not really allowed to congregate on the Temple Mount. In fact, it's hard for anybody other than Muslims to really. A lot of times you can't get to when I was there, we got to the Temple Mount, but at various times it's been closed off to visitors and so forth. You can't get on it. I don't know, people I've known have gone there and couldn't get on the Temple Mount. So there's all kinds of incidents there. Jews will come up on the Temple Mount, and they'll pray on the Temple Mount, and that causes the Muslims there to become very upset, and so on. And Israel the Israeli police have to come in. So there's a lot of tension surrounding this Temple Mount. Theoretically, it's under the control of Jordan in theory, but really Israel, when they captured it in 1967, the 6-Day War. So when they founded the state in 1948, we talked about, they didn't have any real access to any of this, really. They weren't in control until 67. So here is that model again from the south. So you can see these buildings again, Antonia Fortress and so forth. There is the Royal Stoa again. Here's the Court of the Gentiles. So I didn't mention that before, but when we talk about the Court of the Gentiles, so Gentiles could come into this area here. This is mentioned in the New Testament, Court of Gentiles. But Jews, there's a barricade right here, and only Jews could cross that barricade. Remember in the book of Acts, when Paul comes back to Jerusalem, he's accused of bringing a Gentile across that barricade, and that's what gets him in trouble there. They accuse him of bringing somebody who he brought with him from Asia back across that barricade. He gets arrested because of that. Wasn't true, but nevertheless, here's that Fortress Antonia, which is where Paul was taken, so forth, arrested, taken up there. And that's where he says, I'm a Roman citizen. Is it right to flog me or torture me or so forth? And so there's steps that lead down from the Fortress Antonia down here to there. And this is where Paul is remember, there's this riot after Paul, when Paul is there in the temple, and the Romans have to come in from the fortress and kind of rescue him and bring him back there. There's a model of the temple, probably how it looked exactly. So this is the court of the women out here. Women could come in here. And then you've got the court of the men in here. Only men could go into this area here. Court of the women, you can see. Court of the Gentiles, there's that soreg or the barricade, balustrade here, that Gentiles were not supposed to cross, and women could come in here, and then men could come in here. And here's the temple proper. Only priests can go in there, obviously, where you have the holy place and the Holy of Holies. This is a diagram showing, again, kind of showing probably a little better of what things were like in the time of Jesus. Again, you can see this is probably a little more accurate because there are these large columns here with lamps on them, that burn bright during various festivals. This is probably a more accurate reconstruction today of what we think things were really like at the time of Jesus. This was the main entrance down here, these gates. If you go there today, you can still see the remains of these entrances here. So you went up through here and then went up through stairs into the temple into the Temple Mount here. And here's a diagram of the temple complex itself. Again, the court of the women out here, so forth. Another project that Herod, I mentioned here in the notes, the port of Caesarea. Herod, this is another one that was built, and this becomes the main port. If you, in New Testament times, if you want to come to Israel, you come to this particular port. When I was there, they hadn't excavated all of this. Some of it had, but this was quite a project. This Caesarea, named for Caesar, obviously, to honor Caesar. So it was, a Roman area in all aspects, a harbor. Herod had a palace here, a hippodrome, as we'll see. Here is this, what's called the promontory palace, that is, it juts out here. So this is probably what it looked like, what we're told at least, that Herod had this palace here, and at Caesarea, this is what remains of it here. They're doing a lot of underwater excavations here, but this is supposedly what an artist's rendition. And so this is where Paul spent a couple of years. Remember, Paul was when he was captured in Jerusalem, taken to the fortress Antonia, and then he was sent to the Roman governor. This was the Caesarea was the official residence of the Roman governor of Judea. So Caesarea is still in Judea, province of Judea, and the Roman governor had his residence here. And Paul, remember, is taken at night from Jerusalem. He's a Roman citizen, and he's taken to here, and he he spends a couple of years there before he's shipped off to Rome. So this Romans, wherever they were at, they wanted water, and so they built these aqueducts, and these come from many, many miles away up in the mountains and bring water in to a place like Caesarea here, fresh waters for baths and other things like that. So Romans built baths everywhere. Actually, I don't think I show a picture, but there's actually two aqueducts: an upper aqueduct and a lower aqueduct. And these are, precisionally built so that the grade is such that the water doesn't gush down, but it flows down sort of naturally. And Rome had Rome itself had many of these aqueducts supplying, they say, 1 million gallons of water a day there. So here is the palace. Here's the theater that was built there. It's been restored. When I was there, there were chairs down here. They were holding, I guess they still hold events there. I mean, modern events, you know. There were chairs there like for an orchestra or something. But this hippodrome here for races was not excavated. This was all when I was there, this was just sand. I looked like sand just across there. None of this was excavated. This is a hippodrome like was in Rome, the Circus Maximus in Rome, for races, chariot races or other things. A large area here. Here's an aerial view. You can look down and see the theater here and the hippodrome here and the palace out here and so forth. So this was a massive building project that Herod built. Here's that hippodrome from the south, as they've excavated it now, so forth. I'll come back to that later. There's the theater. I was just going to mention about this chart one last time. Remember, we said here that Matthew records the fact that Herod wanted to kill all the babies 2 years and younger. So this, as I say here in the notes, Jesus was born before Herod's death in 4 BC, probably around 5 BC. Now, why is that? Our present system of dating was devised in the 6th century, in the 500s by a monk. But he apparently miscalculated the year. We now know that Herod died around 4 BC. 4 BC. And so Herod is still alive. My point is, Herod is still alive, obviously, when he issues this order. And Jesus has already been born when this order is issued to kill all the male babies. And so Jesus has been born for 1 year or 2 years. So if Herod dies in 4 BC, that means Jesus must have been born, 5 BC or 6 BC. That's why you'll see that date. You'll see the date sometimes that says Jesus was born in 5 BC or 6 BC. That's because we know pretty certainly now that Herod, died in 4 BC. So, when our calendar was calculated in the 6th century, it was miscalculated about the death. And so even though BC and AD is supposed to represent the birth of Jesus, the dates are actually wrong. So it's really a few years off. All right, let me stop there. Was there any questions? I probably couldn't see y'all. I don't know if anybody had any question about anything. I should have asked you to holler out or say something mean or something like that. So how many people visited Israel? I saw the SEALs. Did you go? Okay. And I can't see who else is back there. Okay, and who else did? That's it, yeah. So did you see all these places that I'm talking about? Did you go to Caesarea? Okay, you went to Caesarea. So what year did you go? The SEALs, what year did you go?
Went,
What year?
56, just before COVID, 2019, we went.
Oh, okay. Okay. So was all that stuff at Caesarea excavated then?
think so, yeah.
Okay, okay, it wasn't when I was there. Yeah, it was all they were still working
When
on
did
it
you-
and so forth.
When did you go?
The year 2000, the year 2000, I went. Now, I was somewhat fortunate when I went there because I was able to go into Samaria, and I don't think you were probably able to go into the West Bank there of Samaria, were you?
Don't think
Because
so,
that-
yeah.
There was that they had the uprising infidel, the uprising of the Muslims there, the Palestinians there, and they kind of closed a lot of those places off, like Jacob's Well, things like that. So we were fortunate to see some of those things. But I imagine you spent most of your time like in Jerusalem and in Galilee, also Caesarea. You went to. Did anybody go to the Herodian? Did you go to the Herodian? No, most people don't go there, but you go to Masada. Everybody goes to Masada, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's the way it is. Well, it's worth going. It's really it's worth going, but there's a lot of tensions there now. So I don't know. Every time the fact that Hamas bombed Israel, I'm sure that's hurt tourism. There. I would imagine it's. I don't know if there's a lot going on there now with a war with Hamas there in the south. All right, let's stop here tonight, and we will come back and talk about Herod's sons next week, and we'll kind of finish. We'll finish up the history here, and finish up the history, and move on to talk about the various Jewish parties, Samaritans, and things like that. Move away from the history and get into talk to some of the cultural and political things. All right, good to see all of you. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week.